Hello YouTube, Rumble, wherever you might find this video. My name is Dondep, and I'm here to tell you a few things about myself so that when you go looking for information, you'll get the real deal. Essentially, I am an individual who has... Where do I start? I was born at the turn of the 1960s, and I was raised first by my parents and grandparents for a couple of years, and then I was placed on a farm, a Mennonite farm in Amish country, and I went to school for the first time in horse and buggy. We went everywhere in horse and buggy for a while, and then when I was 7 years old, my father picked me up and took me to live with my 4 new stepbrothers, half-brothers. And that's how things stood until the middle of the 1970s, when I was old enough to choose where I wanted to live, and I went to live with my mother and my stepfather. And those were great years when I was going to a good school that taught you how to think and taught you the love of learning. And I'll always be grateful to that school for teaching me that. However, college wasn't the same. I found myself being asked to conform to a set of values that I felt was a lot more conformist than what I had been led to understand is supposed to be the goal of learning. And so most of what I have learned, I've taught myself, and I've learned from many good people, many good teachers from all walks of life. Most of my life I have been a bookworm. I would have 7, 10, 20 books going at a single time. Anyway, to get back to who I am, it was also in the mid-70s, after I had left home to first be with my mother and my stepfather, and then I left them to be on my own completely, as my mother seemed to be having a nervous breakdown. Since I had grown up in the intervening years, I was no longer the little boy that she had thought she would be getting when I came to live with her permanently. So I was on my own since essentially I was 15, 16 years old. And I had to pay for my own apartment. I had to pay 10% of what I earned at the gas station, pumping gas, to the school. I had to buy my own books. But it was a great time in my life. And it was then that I got involved working for City Hall and learned that there was a lot of corruption going on in the town of Lancaster at the time. And so I founded my own political party because the Republican candidates for Congress that I was helping to work for as a volunteer didn't seem to be addressing these issues. And I called the party the Last Party, the Local Association of Sovereign Trust. It was a real political party, and I ran for mayor, and I lost eyesight in both my eyes because I was up all night trying to run a campaign and trying to earn my daily bread, and even going to school, going to college at the time. Well, to make this long story even shorter, essentially I ended up going back to live with my father and getting involved in the situation in that town where he was living, in the Pocono Mountains at the time. And I assembled a campaign to buy the old train station at the center of town, and we were going to turn it into a cultural center for the use of the town. And in the alliance that I had assembled, we had businessmen that were willing to put up the money to make the purchase from the town council. And we had different theatrical groups and other civic groups that were willing to produce the content. We had the Small Merchants Association behind us because we were fighting a battle against a large corporation, restaurant corporation out of New York that wanted to buy the train station and turn it into a restaurant for tourists to come down from Manhattan on the Sunday trains. Well, it turned out that the city council had a nice kickback scheme that they had planned beforehand, and our campaign was upsetting their apple cart. So They called me in and threatened me with exposing me as a member of the Young Marxist League when I was a few years younger, age 15, 16, and a few other things that had been manufactured. And I said, you do what you have to do, I'm doing what I have to do, and we will see you at the big meeting. Well, the big meeting they canceled. They sold the property to their rivals, and basically we were stabbed in the back by City Hall. The younger members of the campaign, much more radical, they wanted to do something more militant as a reaction. And again, to make a long story as short as possible, the simple version is that we planned bank robberies. I was the leader of the gang. I was the oldest at age 19. And my brother was involved as well. He was 2 years younger than I. And sometimes it's referred to as the last gang, and sometimes it's referred to as the Depler gang. But in any case, we had a male gigolo. He was 17, Billy Custard, and he was able to secure the pearl-handled .38 specials that we used, and the judge's son drove the getaway car. He and his girlfriend, there were 6 of us all together. And we got the first bank, and I don't know how many, 22,000, 42,000 we got from that bank. And we didn't realize the bank was at the center of 3 townships, and so we had a huge high-speed chase with 21 police vehicles chasing us. We burst across the state line through the toll booths, took a sign that said Hope, and eventually we lost them. I think my brother shot out the radiator from one car, one cruiser, and that's where we ended up losing all of our the people that were chasing us. So we ended up meeting up in New York after we split into 2 groups. We left the car, ditched the car, and the car was left at a property that was owned by the driver's girlfriend's father's boss. So to this day, I think the police still think that that was part of the plan. It just was a coincidence. And the woman that lived there was deaf and blind, and her keeper didn't come on Friday afternoons. So in any event, we got away, and we went on to do another bank robbery in Florida where my mother was living. We went down there because we couldn't fly out of the country as we had originally planned if we were going to be chased, because we couldn't get a passport, at least in our own names, and we were using aliases. So it cost a lot of money to be on the run. And so we ended up having to steal a toy gun, call a cab, and rob another bank, which we did. And again, we were chased, but we got away from that one as well. The cab driver was a pretty good cab driver, but in any event, we ended up going back and surrendering months later. It was about 5 months after we had started on this terrible trip, because obviously we weren't going to be able to finance a revolution. We had intended to do the right thing. We had done a good thing, we felt, all of us, but we had been stabbed in the back. City Hall is corrupt. Almost every city hall, I imagine, in this great country is corrupt. And there are a lot of good people, but the majority of people that gravitate into power are corrupt and blackmailable. And this is why they end up getting into power, because of those reasons. So the way is greased for people like that. And it's a sad commentary that there are very few people that are motivated by wanting the welfare of the greater good of the community that get involved in politics. You almost have to be independently wealthy, like our duly elected and duly re-elected President Donald John Trump. In any event, after I served my time, and my time was the longest, I think, of all of us, there were 2 to 6 years, which was extremely fortunate, and it was only because we had been intending to do something good that we did not get the typical 10 to 20 years that would-be bank robbers were getting, or even just your common convenience store thief. But it's not something I recommend for any aspiring revolutionary or political activist these days, especially. Because you're most certainly going to get killed, and even if you can't, the forensics are such that they'll know they'll know within a matter of moments who has done whatever crime this would be. So I don't advocate it for anybody that's thinking that they could emulate this kind of behavior. In our case, in my case, after returning to society, I ended up joining the Democratic Party, and my home plan was in Washington, D.C., where my father had been transferred to. He's now long since passed. But my first official candidate that I was assisting, or as a volunteer, was Marion Barry, of all people. But I was doing what I could to do things the right way, so I was helping him. Of course, we know what happened with him, but it was experience. And then a couple of years after that, in 1984, I read about this candidate, Gary Hart. Actually, he wasn't even a candidate. I saw something on the Washington Post about him, and I said, this man's going to run for president. So I signed on. I was one of the first dozen or so volunteers for his campaign, and I got to know him somewhat. And then when he was forced out of the campaign because of the people that had been hired by George H.W. Bush, who saw him as a real threat, rightfully so. We know how that happened with the monkey business, of course. But when he dropped out, I went to work briefly for Joseph Biden. A lot of losers here, you would think. And yes, indeed, it's a shame that these people I was working for and was so well-intentioned towards, thinking they were going to help restore the country to what it was under JFK, or at least that's how I thought about it. But of course, Biden, a week after I signed on to his campaign, dropped out because he had been busted for plagiarism. So I set my sights to a congressional seat, and that was being hosted by John Flannery. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm talking about two different campaigns. In 1984, Gary Hart went to the convention in San Francisco, and I also went there. I took several of my friends from different campaigns, the Mondale campaign, Jesse Jackson's campaign, and we drove across country in my new Ford Tempo and I spent my entire vacation there, my weeks-long vacation, as a volunteer at that convention. And the highlight was dancing down the aisles with Carole King right before Senator Gary Hart's big speech to the convention. But after we got back and I went to work for John Flannery for Congress, whose wife was a correspondent for ABC News, it was an amazing campaign. And I wasn't there to make any money. I wasn't there to get a job. I just wanted to see that good people got elected. I organized a bridge demonstration of young people, young volunteers, to let everybody knowing that was coming back home from work in D.C. that the Republicans under Reagan did not have a monopoly on youth and exuberance and positive attitude. And it was just a coincidence that the candidate, John Flannery himself, happened to be traveling with a crew, and they were looking for a place to film a commercial when they stopped by the Iwo Jima Memorial, where we were staging our impromptu demonstration that I just described a moment ago. It was just one of those weird coincidences, and I guess as a result of that, the candidate had a better respect for me than I think he otherwise would have, because I wasn't the type that was there to, as I said, make money or to pad my resume. I just wanted to do the right thing to get good people elected. Well, he didn't win that race either, so the next candidate was 1985, Gerald Baliles, the governor of Virginia, and he won. I didn't tell him during his entire time in office about my criminal history, but when he was leaving office, I did apply for a pardon, or executive clemency, as it's correctly called. And he looked at my record, and I had done what was being asked of all of us who wanted to receive our political rights back. And I got them, with one prohibition that I'm not allowed to have firearms, but in any event, I have all my political rights back because I was granted executive clemency. That was in 1985. The next campaign was in 1987. Again, Senator Hart was running, and this was the campaign in which he was forced out, as I described earlier. And if you doubt the reasons for that, you can look into the story by Chip Tatum, who was a operative for the CIA, and he had been approached by G.H.W. Bush and asked to help terminate him, to get rid of him, that is, Senator Hart. He also asked him to get rid of Ross Perot years later when he was running against Bill Clinton. Of course, with Bill Clinton, they were both business partners anyway in smuggling cocaine into the United States, along with General Noriega, and even Bill Barr was part of that operation. Again, Chip Tatum has copious notes about that. So if this is a shock to you, I would definitely suggest that you do your research and look into all of these things, especially what Chip Tatum has to say. There are others, though, that have corroborated this as well. So after that campaign, the next campaign was the Clinton campaign. And of course, I embraced Bill Clinton as being the person that I thought Gary Hart would have been. And unbeknownst to me, he was even worse because of what we've since found out that he was doing, or had been doing during the 1980s down in Arkansas. And after working for the Clinton campaign during the dog days of Jennifer Flowers, I was having to act as the spokesman for Northern Virginia because nobody wanted to touch the Clinton campaign at that time because of Jennifer Flowers and her story. But I bravely stood up, and it was actually future Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Don Beyer, who was actually working with me. I was working with him on the Governor Belisle's campaign of 1985. He told me that he thought I was in Governor Moonbeam's column because of Jerry Brown, and I said, no, I've been backing Bill Clinton since he announced because I think he's going to make a great president. And of course I felt that way for a good long time, and I even have a picture on my wall, I used to, of Bill coming to my office and me shaking his hand and thanking him for coming. And he was on the cover of the Washington Post that day when he came to our job, came to the store, the hardware store. In any event, that was a pretty exciting time. I look back on that, and if I hadn't been so naive, I probably wouldn't have been involved in trying to do things the right way. But that has been my political history. And of course, I was a precinct captain during this time. I forgot to mention. As a precinct captain, it was my duty to try to support all the candidates on the Democratic ticket, from president on down to council members. And I carried that duty out faithfully, I believe. And it was during my time in that precinct that our precinct became majority Democratic over Republicans. I don't know what it is now, but I imagine it's pretty fractured, considering that a lot of Democrats turned out to vote for Trump and support him because of the obvious choice to choose somebody that does not have our best interests in mind. We'll get to that in a future video. But I did want to tell people that not only was I a flash-in-the-pan rock star, yes, as lead singer and bass player for the band Mineshaft. We were the first American band to perform in the nation of Kazakhstan, and we were headlining this huge festival in the Olympic Stadium there in Almaty, the capital at that time. And yes, we were mobbed by crowds and screaming girls. It was like Beatlemania for about a week. And we played our hearts out. I still listen to the music that we made, but we came back to the States and everybody was like, Mineshaft? Who is that? But it was a real thing, and you can even find videos of our performances on YouTube about that. So yes, between being a rock and roll musician, a bass player, and a singer, and an ex-bank robber, and a political revolutionary, and a political activist, and a precinct captain, And trying to do my best to earn my daily bread as I did all of these other things, I still believe that every American owes it to their community to do something for that community. Whether you're drawing blood for the Red Cross, actually, that may not be a good thing anymore. And my father did that after he retired. But something to help your community more than just earning your daily bread and entertaining yourself. It's something we should expect of all of us, just like there's a part of us that is a spiritual being that we need to tend to that too. And usually we used to do that on Sundays, although these days I don't know that many people that do reflect on their spiritual side at any time, let alone Sundays. So those are a few highlights about my past, who I am, what I've done. I'm not necessarily proud of a lot of those things, but I'm not ashamed of them either. They're part of what made me. And after all of that, of course, the biggest chapter in my life was when we had to flee to Canada because my family and I, it was principally me and my girlfriend and her aunt, we were put under surveillance night and day, 24/7, for a whole year in 2002, and I was receiving information from the inside. And of course, my own curiosity was causing me to look into things that are normally left to others or to experts, or people don't usually look into these kinds of things. But the issue of aliens and UFOs never interested me as much as their involvement as part of an attempt by the government to hide the truth from us. And that's why I was always interested in Majestic 12. Are they real? Because they would be doing what we would expect them to do, which is to maintain domestic tranquility so that the public would not panic if and when they were to find out that our government, the human authorities that control the government anyway, not necessarily the public government that you might think you have elected, but the people that really run the world, have had relationships with two groups of aliens. And I say two, even though there are many hundreds of different species. There's only one species that has been granted the rights for shepherding humanity through the coming soul harvest. This is all information that I found out in greater detail once I started to learn of this. But it was a year spent being followed to work, to the bank, to the grocery store, everywhere, and having that white van sitting outside our door with its engine running all the time. So all of that is detailed, of course, in our court case. And in that court case, which we went to Canada for, we actually were refugees because our phones were tapped and we were being followed, and it was haunting. It was called haunting level of surveillance. And because of that, we had to apply for refugee status because our original plan upon going to Canada had been interfered with. And again, these are details that I'll have to put out in coming videos. But the importance right now is to let you know, as a human, and hopefully as a patriot, that your governments and the human authorities that run your world are fully aware not only of the fact that aliens are real, but why they even came here, why they broke the quarantine, which they were not supposed to do, because we are supposed to have the free will to develop on our own. This is really the origin and destiny of humankind. And they broke that quarantine to warn us of what was coming. The good guys then came along a few years later, that was Roswell, and confirmed, but said that no, the bad guys were the ones that were telling the human authorities what they wanted to hear. Anyway, it's the conflict between these two spiritually polarized groups, both in extraterrestrial species and in human species, that is the key to the soul harvest that is pending and has been pending now. We have to get our act together. We have to finish cleaning house so that every human has an equal opportunity to decide how they're going to confront what is coming. And it's for that reason I believe that President Trump is being assisted by these entities But we as humans need to know a lot more about the situation. So hopefully over the coming days, weeks, months, because I don't think we have that many years left, maybe 3, that these issues need to be discussed, and that the government officials that are continuously bamboozling you with tales about, oh, UFOs are out there and they do things that humans can't do, that hasn't advanced the discussion for 50 years. Now, we're going to jumpstart that discussion. That's my role, if I can call it that, and I would ask your help in doing that. But if you think that the government is going to tell you that they have secrets that they have access to that we can't have, and that all we have to do is get them to admit it, that's not true. They have wanted to own the secrets of the technology that the extraterrestrials have. But these extraterrestrials are not just advanced beings from another solar system. They are our soul ranchers or caretakers. They are here to inspire us and to guide us if we ask them, but they cannot interfere in our third density reality. That is highly important. Even though we can sometimes see them when they shift from fourth density, we are not allowed to do that, and that is really against the edicts of the Council of Worlds, and it has been for some time. But they do sometimes communicate with human authorities, as we have heard in various news reports. But that is usually an attempt by them to gently remind those human authorities that they're dragging their feet and they have to do better about disclosing what is coming. Because there are people in harm's way that need to know these things so they can make their best decision about what to do facing this. And I hope to be back to fill in some more blanks at a later time, but I'm going to call this one it. And this has really been my first video in years. I'm just doing it on the fly, extemporaneously, and I've hoped that provoked you to think about a few things. Until we next meet again.